Well, good evening, everyone, and welcome to this online Wes Talk, organised by the New Room in Bristol in partnership with the Methodist Church's Learning Network Southwest. The New Room is the oldest Methodist building in the world. Situated in Bristol city centre, John Wesley called the chapel a light in the city and used it as a base for his work. In 2017, a new visitor centre opened on the site, which features a new revamped museum, cafe, shop, library, and meeting rooms. My name's Mandy Briggs, and I'm the Education Officer at the New Room. Behind the scenes is my colleague Kate Rogers, who will be heading up the technical side of the talk this evening. Please note that this talk is being recorded. During the talk, you'll be able to see and hear our speakers and presenters as they talk to each other, but your own video and audio will be turned off. If you have particular questions that you would like to ask the panel, please save them for the question time towards the end of our hour together, where we'll ask you to write your questions into the Q&A facility. And you can access this by clicking Q&A at the bottom of your screen. I think our speakers may well be joining us now. Our Wes Talk series aims to explore life and faith in today's world. This evening, we're going to be exploring the theme, a passion for pilgrimage. Why is the experience of being a pilgrim still an important one? And why is it a passion for so many people? What is the difference between being a pilgrim and being a tourist? And how can pilgrimage change us? I'd like to introduce our speakers this evening. Rev Steven Manskar is an ordained elder in the United Methodist Church. He recently retired after serving as pastor of Trinity United Methodist Church in Grand Rapids, Michigan. Steve previously worked for 19 years as Director of Wesleyan Leadership at Discipleship Ministries, a general agency of the United Methodist Church in Nashville, Tennessee. He directs the annual Wesley pilgrimage to England. Steve is the author of a range of books about discipleship, including Accountable Discipleship, Living in God's Household, and A Disciple's Journal, a guide to daily Bible reading, prayer, and discipleship. Steve lives in Grand Rapids, Michigan with his wife, Gina. Their son, Noah, lives and works in Brooklyn, New York. Steve enjoys cycling, golf, reading, and music. So welcome, Steve. And I'd also like to introduce Melanie Gordon. Melanie is a co-leader of the United Methodist Church's annual Wesley pilgrimage and the founder of Do, Love, Walk, which supports congregations in shaping and cultivating gifts and talents of congregants to equip them to interpret and respond to the needs, concerns, and hopes of the world. Mel serves on the Diversity Guidelines Committee for the National Association of Episcopal Schools, and she previously served for 10 years as Director of Ministry with Children in the Leadership Ministries Division of Discipleship Ministries of the United Methodist Church. Mel's publications include What Every Child Should Experience, a guide for teachers and leaders in United Methodist congregations, and Growing Everyday Disciples, Covenant Discipleship with Children. Melanie can usually be found spending time with family and friends, traveling, writing, cooking, or, I like this bit, Melanie, rocking out to the music of Tina Turner, Jimi Hendrix, or Bach, and a little Charles Wesley. So Steve and Melanie, I would like to say thank you for joining us this evening, but as there is obviously a bit of a time difference for us between us and the States, I also need to say thank you for joining us this afternoon. It's a pleasure to have you both with us. And I'd also like to welcome Richard Sharples, who is a Methodist minister from Bristol, who will be joining us in the discussion later on. But without further ado, I believe that Steve is going to be speaking first on and starting our reflections on pilgrimage. So thank you, Steve. and over to you.
Okay, Mandy, thank you very much. And it's a joy to be with you. And this is the time of year when I should be in England. And visiting the new room with a group of pilgrims, mostly from America, and we usually have some from Africa and other parts of the world with us as well. But we'll be doing that next year, I'm confident. I'm going to share my screen here. So I thought it would be more interesting for people to see some photographs related to what I'm saying rather than looking at my talking head. There. So many years ago, I began work on a Doctor of Ministry degree at Wesley Theological Seminary in Washington, D.C. And the focus of that degree was John Wesley and the poor. I'm telling you this because this is my background as to how I got interested in pilgrimage and how I experienced pilgrimage myself for the first time. So for 2 years, I read about Wesley and early Methodism. I studied Wesley's emphasis upon obedience to Jesus' command to his followers to love God with all their heart, soul, and mind, and to live out their love for God by loving their neighbors as themselves. I read Wesley's own writings, his journal, letters, sermons, and tracts. And with all the reading, of course, I wrote lots of papers. I even wrote a book during that time on the biblical, theological, and historic foundations of early Methodism, and particularly the class meeting. All that work helped me understand more deeply the meaning and power of the Wesleyan Methodist tradition. The final course of my DMin program was a 15-day seminar in England. At the end of my first day in England, I realized I was on pilgrimage. We arrived at Heathrow International Airport early Saturday morning and were taken by coach to Bawtry, a small village in southern Yorkshire. And on Sunday morning, we boarded our white vans and traveled the short distance from Bawtry to Epworth, where we worshiped with the people of Wesley Memorial Methodist Church. That afternoon, our professors led us on the short walk through town, up the church walk to the parish church of St. Andrews. I knew, of course, from my studies that John and Charles Wesley's father, Samuel, served as rector of the Epworth parish for 38 years. We began our visit by stopping at Samuel's grave in the churchyard, where I recalled that John Wesley, there was a journal entry in Wesley's journal from the day soon after his father's death when he visited Epworth, but the new rector prohibited him from speaking from the pulpit. So he announced that he would be in the churchyard later that afternoon. And he returned that afternoon and addressed a large crowd standing on top of his father's tomb, pictured here. And when I touched the stone of Samuel Wesley's grave, I began to sense something happening in me. Upon entering the church, the baptismal font was placed immediately to the left of the churchyard door. A plaque stood at the base of the font, and it read, "John and Charles Wesley were baptized here." When I laid my hand upon the stone font and touched the water, the Holy Spirit overwhelmed me. I was filled with awe and gratitude. Touching that font in the water made John and Charles Wesley come alive for me in a new way. Of course, I knew they were real historic figures whose life and work helped to form the church that formed me. Being in that place filled me with gratitude for the Wesley brothers, the community that nurtured and formed them as servants and preachers of the gospel of Jesus Christ. I realized the same Holy Spirit that inspired and led them inspires and leads me to teach, serve, and preach. From the moment I touched the St. Andrew's Church font, that D-Min seminar took on a whole new meaning for me. And it took me by surprise. I did not expect this. All the study, reading, and writing became acts of devotion. They prepared me for an experience that drew me closer to Jesus Christ. That 15-day seminar became a pilgrimage. A pilgrim is a person who journeys to a sacred place as an act of religious devotion. To people of the world over, pilgrimage is a spiritual exercise, an act of devotion to find a source of healing or even to perform a penance. Always, it is a journey of risk and renewal. For a journey without challenge has no meaning. One without purpose has no soul. So what's the difference between a tourist and a pilgrim? At first glance, the tourist and the pilgrim might look the same. They're both travelers after all. But in fact, their relation to their surrounding is very different. Tourists are escaping life. Pilgrims are embracing it. Tourists focus preparation on what will be needed to maximize monetary investment and comfort. Pilgrims focus preparation on understanding the context they are entering. They reflect on how the trip will result in personal transformation as well as positive impacts for the local people. Tourists seek historical tourist sites and interesting facts. Pilgrims seek to interpret historical sites to reveal present-day truths about themselves and interaction with the world. Tourists observe their surroundings. Pilgrims immerse themselves in the culture they are experiencing. Tourists interact mainly with fellow tourists and designated locals. Pilgrims interact as much as possible with people of the communities they visit. Tourists visit famous places and sites, while pilgrims seek places that reveal stories, often off the beaten path. Tourists seek comfort and familiarity. Pilgrims recognize hardship and discomfort as part of learning and transformation. Tourists return home to show pictures of places they visited, while pilgrims return home to share stories of the people and culture encountered on the journey and of personal change. Tourists use their own culture as a reference point for behavior and interactions. Pilgrims discover as much as possible about the local culture and use it as a reference point for behavior and interactions. And finally, tourists return home more or less the same person, only with new geographical knowledge. Pilgrims return home changed by the reflections and interactions generated by their journey. Since 2010, I have organized an annual pilgrimage in England for United Methodist pastors and leaders in laity in leadership. Our vision for the Wesley pilgrimage is to immerse United Methodist leaders in the Wesleyan way of missional leadership and Christian formation. We encourage the people to prepare and experience for their pilgrimage as pilgrims and not as tourists. Every year, it's difficult convincing Americans they are going on pilgrimage and not a holiday tour. We encourage them to read a book on the art of pilgrimage. We also assign them books about John and Charles Wesley and early Methodist movement, and we encourage them to read the Wesleys themselves. Travel is one of the ways we help the people become pilgrims. They are on their own to get themselves from their homes, wherever they live, to Sarum College in Salisbury. We do not arrange travel for them. They do not travel to England as a group on a charter flight. This is an important part of the pilgrim experience. It dispels the notion that they are embarking on a tour. For many, it is their first time traveling abroad. Once the pilgrims arrive at Sarum College, their days are immersed in prayer and sacrament. The first act of each day is morning prayer with Eucharist. The last act, before they go to bed, is Compline, night prayer. All pilgrims are invited to gather in the college chapel each morning and night. This, of course, is voluntary. I tell them if they are exhausted and need to sleep in an extra minutes in the morning, or go to bed early at night, they should listen to their bodies and rest. But experience tells me that the pilgrims are eager to gather for prayer and receive the sacrament. They are a means of grace that keeps the pilgrimage centered on Christ. The routine of daily prayer and Eucharist is also what many pilgrims miss the most when they return home. Morning prayer and Compline always include singing. We are Methodists after all. Each day begins and ends with the group singing a Charles Wesley hymn, and they are encouraged to reflect on the words of the hymn throughout the day. Most of the pilgrims today come from congregations that no longer sing hymns in worship. Singing, reading, and praying with Charles Wesley's hymns was an important part of Methodist spirituality that is rapidly being lost. The pilgrimage experience introduces Methodists to the power of Wesleyan hymnody as resources for devotion and discipleship. Several days are devoted to travel to heritage sites important to the formation of the Methodist movement. Epworth, where John and Charles Wesley were born, baptized, and raised in the rectory. Oxford, where John and Charles experienced calls to ordained ministry and formed the vision for a missional movement centered in the mission of Jesus Christ in and for the world when they formed the Holy Club. Of course, Bristol, where the method of Methodism was developed, and Methodism as a movement is launched with the building of the new room and development of the class meeting and lay pastoral leadership of class leaders. And finally, London, where Methodism matures into a missional institution and ultimately a new denomination. The days of travel are long and exhausting. They are also exhilarating for the pilgrims. Visiting the heritage sites makes their reading, study, and writing about the Wesley brothers and the Methodist movement come alive in a new and vital way. And finally, the pilgrims are organized into small groups of 5 to 6 that meet daily over the evening meal. The purpose of the small groups is to give the pilgrims a place to process their experience with each other pray for one another, and form friendships that last beyond the pilgrimage. The Wesley pilgrimage in England changes lives. It opens hearts and minds to the Holy Spirit. Pilgrims often, for the first time, learn about and experience Methodism as a movement of people who, in the words of John Wesley, profess to pursue holiness of heart and life in a steady imitation of the one they worship, in all his imitable perfections, more particularly in justice, mercy, and truth, or universal love filling the heart and governing the life. And now I'll hand it off to my dear friend and colleague, Melanie Gordon.
Hello, I am Melanie Gordon. Nice to be with you all. I hope you can hear me well. Thank you, Steve. I always love working with Steve because we balance each other out in a lot of ways. So Steve has set the foundation for you about what we experience on our pilgrimage, and also the importance of pilgrimage and how it's a different type of experience than going on vacation or any other type of travel. What I'd like to talk to you about is the passion that I have around pilgrimage that basically led to me being a part of the Wesley pilgrimage in England with Steve. There's something about walking in the steps of people who have gone before you. There's something about walking in the steps of Jesus, of John Wesley, of those who are disenfranchised and those who are forgotten. And I'd like to share with you about a few pilgrimages I've been on in my experience. Of course, I have on the screen right now a shot of a pilgrimage that I took of pain and hope. That was about the Rwanda genocide. Before I get to that, though, my first experience of pilgrimage was as a seminarian at Duke Divinity School. And it was in Durham, North Carolina, where the civil rights movement in America was very strong there. And we walked through those places where people had fought for their rights to be seen as full human beings and citizens of the United States. And that changed me in a lot of ways, in that I had not had the experience of what pilgrimage can look like and how it can then impact how you relate to other people and how you understand humanity. So a couple of years later, I went with one of our professors, Father Katangale and Chris Rice, on the pilgrimage of pain and hope on the Rwanda genocide after a course on the genocide itself. And my curiosity in this pilgrimage was, why is it that there were Christians who were in service together on Easter Sunday who then were part of the killing of people who they were sitting on pews with? And what does that mean to us and our humanity? So our time there, and let me actually go back to this picture. This picture is the place of liberation for so many people, and also a place of a lot of death. So it was the French who came in and liberated people in this space. And these are photographs here of the clothes of the people who died there, and some of the actual bodies of people. And what was very tough for me during that time was the how much it was really just in our face of what had happened, the pain. It truly was a pilgrimage of pain, but there was this hopefulness that came from the survivors that we encountered, and that there were people who came to save them when they thought no one was going to come to save them, and what they actually shared with one another during this time of trying to survive and trying to hold on to their faith and what they believed in and how they shared that faith. We also, during that time, some of you may have seen or read the book Hotel Rwanda, and it's really the Hotel de Milcalen, which we stayed there, and then walking that space and living in that space for that time, when you know that that was a haven for so many people and saved so many people's lives. That whole time for us was a time to sit and to pray and to engage with one another about what it might mean to be forgotten, what it might mean to be disenfranchised, what it might mean to live in fear, when so many of us who were on this pilgrimage didn't experience that. Another place during this time that we visited was a place where there were school-age girls who, instead of turning in their other colleagues, their school friends, as being Hutu or Tutsi, they protected their friends. And what does this type of strength mean for us as adults when young children are so strong in places like this, and in spaces like this, and also in spaces, when you think about it, that people did not actually respond in kindness to their neighbors. One of the other things that struck me about this pilgrimage, and again, it's a pilgrimage of pain and hope. How do we experience the pain? Where do we see the hope? Steve talked about, what happens when we move out of this pilgrimage, what happens next. And these two pictures are pictures of the church that stood there and after genocide, when the church was destroyed. And what I found really interesting about the person that showed us this rendering of the church was how hopeful they were, even though they had been a part of they had been within the building, within the church building, when so many people were killed. And again, Steve was talking about how prayer is so important in pilgrimage. And we on this pilgrimage had morning prayer and midday prayer, and we had small groups, and we unpacked so much of what we saw during the day and looked at, what do we do with this? Now that we know, what do we do? And how does this change not only our responsibility to other human beings, but how do we reconcile our love for God? And then how do we live it and offer it to others in a way that honors the lives of the people who died during this genocide? Another pilgrimage that I took part in was in South Africa, and this was actually pretty recently in 2016. And it was one of truth and reconciliation. So we sat with people who had been forcibly evicted from their homes. And as you can see from the photographs here, this is 60,000 people, people of color, who were literally taken out of their homes as pushed out of their homes as their homes in the place where they lived, which was District 6, was bulldozed. And, I think about the time in South Africa, where in my mind, you knew you were on pilgrimage, and you knew you weren't there for a vacation or even for mission. You were there to sit with some unspeakable things that had happened to people and to figure out how, and for me, it was to figure out how in my own Christian identity, what does this mean that I have a responsibility for when I leave this space? Because certainly for those of you who I'm sure have been to South Africa, it is a stunningly beautiful place to be. Everyone would love to be in Cape Town for vacation and to just look out at that beautiful water. But we decided to go to the hard places. And what the hard places did for me were to help me to engage in what was difficult. And once you engage in what is difficult, you find a sort of compassion that a deeper compassion for what it means to be human, what it means to live as someone who, as a person of faith, and what it means to reconcile. That was one of the big things about this pilgrimage of truth and reconciliation, was reconciling what does it mean to be absent from, or basically just turn away from what people are going through, and how can we be present for them. Since then, after this pilgrimage, which takes me back to actually my first pilgrimage, I began to work with young people in a process called Ubuntu circles, where they can sit with the hard stories of what people have been through and hear people's lived experiences, thereby becoming more compassionate towards not just the person in front of them, but the people around them. And when we do this, we form community in a way that is more loving and honors who we are as children of God. So all of my pilgrimages until the one of the Wesley pilgrimage, which the first time I went, I was the wrangler. So I made sure that everybody got on the bus, and I was a participant. But all of my pilgrimages up until the point of the Wesley pilgrimage had to do with those who were disenfranchised, or who were victimized, or who were forgotten. So when I think about that and think about balancing what does it mean to go on pilgrimage to learn more about why I am a Christian, why I believe and practice the way that I do, I think that the two go hand in hand, because both have taught me why it is that I live out my Christian identity in a particular way, and why it is that coming out of those experiences, walking in the steps of Jesus, of John Wesley, of the disenfranchised, of the forgotten, helps me to understand more about God's love, agape love, and what that means to offer other people that love. And what I've realized also is that as I move forward in looking at what to do next, where do I travel next? How do I do mission, or all of these different opportunities to move out of our own space into another space to learn and to be transformed? I have a desire and a passion to spend time on pilgrimage as often as possible. I think so often we look at pilgrimage as having to go far away from where we are. But one of the things I learned on my first pilgrimage in Durham, North Carolina, was I was living there, yet there were journeys that I learned from by going with a group of people, other seminarians, to learn about what it means to be the church, what it means to be a follower disciple of Jesus in the midst of someone else's pain or someone else's journey, and how we take that and use that to continue to help to make disciples, to continue to help, for me, young people to see that it's important for us as human beings to continuously look for the humanity in people. Whether it's, when I'll scoot forward a little bit. So one of the great things about the Wesley pilgrimage for me is that I grew up in the Methodist Church. It was the Methodist Church and the United Methodist Church in my lifetime. And my family was definitely, we're 5th generation Methodist, so it's been in my family for a long time. And I will say that there was always this desire for me to know more about the Wesleys, not just what I read in books, but I just wanted to see there and be there. And being a teacher by profession, what I know is that experiences are essential for all human beings. So it's not just about the reading and the discussing. It is about where can we go to experience the lived experiences of other people who impact our lives. So how I would close this is to say that engaging in the difficult is difficult. But what it does for us is that it allows us to transform community in a way that helps us to offer what we've experienced to others in a way that that is not only pleasing to God, but helps us again to see who people are and understanding the humanity of people. Thank you. And I will turn it over, I think, to Richard.
Gosh, yeah, fascinating and not what I expected, I must say. Particularly that last stuff, Melanie. I mean, you know, that's taking pilgrimage in a very uncomfortable direction, really, isn't it? I just was wondering to myself, particularly knowing your other background, to what extent you found pilgrimage a good way to engage young people, because that's one of my passions too.
Absolutely. So I just finished a 3-year tenure at teaching religion and ethics in an Episcopal school, and I realized that one of the things I would do, especially with believe it or not, with the ethics piece, is bringing in my experiences of pilgrimage to the kids, because they knew a lot about mission. We do a lot of mission trips, and for our kids, I don't know if it's the same for the kids in the UK, but for our kids, there's something about putting on your resume or on your application for university that you went on a mission trip and it changed your life. And I always encourage them to please don't say that, because everyone does. But for them, and I feel like we did little pilgrimages within our own city in ways that, in things that they did not see, like what I call another tour of Greenville in the space where we live. They're very used to seeing all the great stuff about our city, but they're not so used to seeing the tough stuff. And so taking them through that and showing them places that they may not have seen, and talking about, so how does this impact how we are to engage in the world? How are we to choose our paths as far as vocation is concerned? How are we to decide what it is that we believe, what it is we're willing to stand for, how far we're willing to go in certain areas. And I find that young people are so open to this once you put them in the experience. Developmentally, we know that children learn from experience by the doing. And even teenagers need that, because I was working with teenagers who are between 15 and 18, and they are tough cookies. But what I love is that once they get into a place where they are experiencing a lived experience of someone that they either have known and not known a lot about, or have not even thought about, these questions come out about what is the way that I am expected to live my life. And the conversations and the differences in the kids over time and the way that they engage with others is overwhelming. It's truly overwhelming.
Wonderful. Can I ask a question of Steve? Is that all right? I mean, taking us back to the kind of mission agenda, because one of my convictions is that pilgrimage is just a really good way for the church to do mission. I don't know whether that would align with any of your experiences, Steve.
Well, yes, absolutely, because, and I say that because, and I think of mission in a little different, because if you say mission to a typical, at least American United Methodist, they think about, like Melanie mentioned, they go to a community filled with poor people and they're going to go and work and repair buildings or build a building or, do something in service in that community. And that's all, that's great. Another way of the way that where the Wesley pilgrimage fits into my understanding of mission is also in the mission of our denomination, which is stated as to make disciples of Jesus Christ for the transformation of the world. So the purpose where the Wesley pilgrimage contributes to that mission is, one, a lot of times for the first time, exposing these United Methodists, even pastors, to the roots of their own tradition. And it draws, through the practice of daily, prayer and sacrament and singing hymns, something is awakened in them that draws them closer to Christ, closer to an understanding of particular. And I'm speaking as a clergy. We've had a number of pastors who their call to ministry was reawakened on the Wesley pilgrimage. They realized, they were reminded again as to why they're living this life and serving serving the church, serving Christ in the church or through the church. And we are very intentional on the pilgrimage to keep it centered in Christ. And I, right from the beginning, I tell the people, we are not here. Yes, we are in a Wesley pilgrimage, but we are not here to worship John and Charles Wesley. We're interested in the Wesleys because we believe they are a very good lens through which to understand Jesus and his mission in the world, and to help us to connect with that mission of loving God with all of our heart, soul, and mind, and loving our neighbor as ourselves, or loving what God loves. And I must say, we've been pretty effective at that mission, because people leave at the end of the pilgrimage. First of all, one, they fall in love with Sarum College in Salisbury and they don't want to leave. But they go home energized with a new passion for ministry and for mission, for being missional leaders. that is more than program directors. Does that answer your question? Does that?
Yeah, I mean, I'll just finish my little contribution with a couple of observations, really. I mean, over the past month, as Mandy said earlier on, I have been busy with various different expressions of pilgrimage, two of which have started at the New Room. One of which is this sort of pilgrimage to Tolpuddle. So it's a kind of journey into social justice and discovering, researching stories that help us to kind of connect with those Methodist roots of social justice. And the Tolpuddle story, which I think you heard last month, is one of those. And the other one was actually retracing Wesley's first journey into Wales, which was really to look at the way that his kind of whole gospel engagement with society and culture is relevant today, and how it was interesting, how it was really exciting to a lot of people that we talked of here in Bristol. And there's a whole lot of stuff what the churches are doing, you know, which is about the whole gospel. Anyway, that's enough from me. Over to you, Mandy.
Oh no, thank you very much. Thank you very much for contributing those thoughts, Richard. I think I say this every month, but we start in a particular place with these talks, and then we never quite know where they're going to lead. And I feel already that we have gone into quite profound places with this talk. Encouraging places and challenging places and profound places. I just wanted to remind everyone who is attending that there is now an opportunity to ask Steve and Melanie some questions. So if you have got a question, please can you write it into the Q&A box at the bottom, not the chat box. We've already got one question that's come into the Q&A box from David Palmer, who wants to know, is there a place for individual pilgrimage? So I think what David, forgive me for putting words into your mouth, but I think what you mean is, can you do a pilgrimage on your own? And I'd be interested in Mel and Steve's reflections on that.
Well, you want me to start, Melanie?
Go right ahead.
Okay. Yes, absolutely. In fact, I know in the past several years, I've had a number of friends who, you know, as individuals have gone on the Camino. I always forget the full, the Camino de Pastel. Anyway, it's in Spain. That famous pilgrimage trail that goes across northern Spain. And that is very much, you know, certainly it can be a group experience, but I think it's more of an individual pilgrimage journey. And people go on that pilgrimage for many, many different reasons. In fact, there's a film I recommend to our Wesley pilgrims to watch before, as part of their preparation for the pilgrimage, to help them understand what pilgrimage can look like. And it's based on, it's called The Way, and it stars Martin Sheen and his son, Emilio Estevez, who was the director and producer of the film. And it's about the Camino and one man's experience on the Camino and the people that he meets on the way. And I also know of people who've done their own personal Wesley pilgrimages in England. I've helped some people, you know, plan those things. And so certainly, and pilgrimage is, it is very much a personal, individual experience. And as much, and it is also a group experience, and it, you know, and you can, you know, so yes. I'll stop talking now, Melanie.
Yeah, I would just add that I personally do individual pilgrimages that focus on justice The last one that I did kind of unknowingly, I mean, I planned it, but I didn't know how it was going to turn out because it's going to be short, was going to a space here in the state I live in, which is South Carolina, to a place called Atlantic Beach, which was the segregated beach when I was growing up. And for me, going there to have time to, I'd already done some reading, and to sit and to talk to people who are left there, and they're not very many, in looking at what is our responsibility as society to the history of that place. And so that for me is a different type of pilgrimage, but it's one that I didn't want to do with others. I wanted it to be something that looks specifically at a justice piece and how we can respond to that.
Thank you. Our attendees seem to be a little shy this evening because I've only had one question submitted at the moment. So if there is anybody who is dying to ask a question, then now is your chance. Now I've seen one, we have another one, hang on. Do you ever gather pilgrims together again after a time, to hear testimonies of what God did next in their lives after a pilgrimage, or hear feedback from them afterwards? That's a really interesting question. I believe actually that one's come from Kate in the background. So what happens after a pilgrimage? And again, I wonder if you'd both like to comment on that.
Well, we did one successfully a few years ago, and this was the purpose of it was an invitation only event to people who had been on the Wesley pilgrimage, and invited them to gather at Epworth by the Sea in St. Simon's Island, Georgia, South Georgia, which is basically a Methodist resort. And we gathered, I don't know, nearly 50 people who had been on the Wesley pilgrimage. I think we were there for 3 days, and myself was there. I think Melanie was there.
Yes.
And Paul Chilcote came. And I think we had Taylor Burton Edwards, I think, was with us. And we had a good number of pilgrimage alums gathered. And it was a rich time for them, one, to be together again, some of them who had all been on the same pilgrimage, because one thing that happens is friendships are formed, and they take those friendships home with them, and they keep in touch with each other. And then, we heard stories of what people have done since their pilgrimage, and what a lot of them have done. They went home and started small groups in their congregation, which is what I wanted them to do, particularly. And others went home and simply told the story to their people about what it means to be a Methodist, what Methodism, they share the story of what they learned about early Methodism, about the class meeting, about class leaders, about the Methodist movement, Methodism as a movement. That I know like Melanie, I'm a lifelong Methodist. I was born and baptized in a Methodist church, but I never really learned what it really meant to be a Methodist until I went to seminary and read Wesley, and that's what changed my life. And so the people who've been on the pilgrimage, a lot of them, they just simply go and tell the story to their congregations, to their children, to the youth, and they encourage others to go on the pilgrimage. So what about you, Melanie?
Yeah, so I think a couple of things that to share. One is that the Facebook group for the pilgrims just lights up afterwards, which I think is pretty amazing, of sharing what has happened, what they're doing now, how this has opened up something new ministries. It's pretty amazing, and I'll have to say, as being a pilgrim first and then a co-leader of the Wesley pilgrimage, that the first time it was the very same for me. Just came back excited with, what are we going to do next? How you're just on fire when you come back, and it's amazing. And that reunion that we had, what I loved about it was that everyone's experience was the same but different. So we walked in the same steps, but what everyone took away from it had a lot to do with, number one, what they were willing to open themselves up to, and then what they were willing to take a chance on, or take a leap of faith on when they returned.
Thank you. That's really inspiring to know how that really, it's like the experience embeds itself in people and travels with them wherever they go next. And I really love that about the experience. Now, saying that there wasn't any questions, now we've actually got 3 quite meaty questions now, with about 1 minute left to answer them. So I wonder, actually, if you'll forgive us, we may go on for a few minutes longer than the hour. Now, Christopher Spivey has a question. Can pilgrimage be secular? And given that we don't have a lot of time, I wonder if you could maybe try and answer that question in a couple of sentences, if it's at all possible.
Yes.
Yes.
It absolutely can be. Pilgrimage is for everyone. I think we certainly look at it more so of what does it mean to who we are as people of faith, but definitely pilgrimage is for everyone.
It's quite interesting because
a book that we well, I was going to say the book that we recommend for pilgrims to understand pilgrimage is this book by Phil Cosino, The Art of Pilgrimage, A Seeker's Guide to Making Travel Sacred. And this is not a Christian pilgrimage book. This is about, simply, being a seeker and learning how to travel with purpose. And how to travel as a pilgrim. And it doesn't require that you have Christian faith or any faith for that matter, but simply desiring to be more deeply human. That's what pilgrimage ultimately is about.
Thank you. We must try and get a copy of that book at the New Room. It sounds absolutely excellent. And Chris Spivey, maybe we can recommend that one to you as well. Now, this next name you may recognize. It's from David Worthington.
Who's that?
During the many Wesley pilgrimages that you've led in England, were there different themes that emerged that were particular to specific pilgrimages? So I guess, did some things emerge one year and other things emerge another?
I don't quite know how to answer that. My immediate answer is no. There's well, certainly each pilgrimage is different because it's different people every time, and they all bring different expectations and needs with them. but the focus of the pilgrimage is pretty much always the same, which is on missional Wesleyan leadership and discipleship, and the focus on holiness, the holiness of heart and life, and the practices of the means of grace. And so sometimes the questions, there's lots of questions about the means of grace or about Wesley and social justice emerge that we deal with, and that's, we have conversations about that around the dinner table. So I'm kind of rambling right now. So
I think you just need to have a word with David for asking such a difficult question.
Yes, he probably did that on purpose too. So.
I don't know if Melanie, you want to add anything to that. I guess I was wondering, as I read out the question, were there things that happened externally around a pilgrimage in a particular year, like world events, for example, that has shaped some conversation?
Well,
Melanie, do you have anything?
I don't.
I'm not.
Okay.
I haven't been on enough of them to.
Well, I think that's okay, and it's fine. I think you're both being very honest. I think our final question comes from Neil Briggs. Which is more key to pilgrimage and its impact on people, travel or encounter? I'm wondering how you would differentiate pilgrimage from being on retreat. Now, that again is quite a difficult question, and I just want to say that's my husband asking me that one. So I suppose the core question from that is, which is more key to pilgrimage, travel or encounter? And how is a pilgrimage different from being on a retreat?
Well,
I'm sorry, Steve.
Well, go ahead, Melanie. No.
So I think with pilgrimage that encounter is definitely number one of those two, just because it can happen right where you sit, right? So you don't have to cross an ocean or a country to go on pilgrimage. We do them right here in small ways. I've done them small ways with my own students right here in the city. But it does require you getting outside of your house, going into another community that may not be the community where you sit. And what I would say about with the difference in retreat, as someone who encourages people to go and retreat as often as needed, is that with pilgrimage, there is an intention around learning something about humanity more deeply, and about who you are and what you believe more deeply, than with retreat, which is this setting apart, removing yourself from the everyday to renew yourself. So although both can happen, both of those can happen either ones, but I think those would be the focus of them. Steve, what would you add?
The big difference between pilgrimage and retreat is the experience of travel and of being on a journey with purpose. And I'll just say that travel is an essential part, and it's integral to the pilgrimage experience, which again is why the people who go on the Wesley pilgrimage, they make their own travel arrangements. And we've learned from experience over the years that doing it that way, that not doing everything for them, not getting their airline tickets and traveling together as a group, that they are on their own to do that is an essential part of the pilgrim experience, because, you know, for a good number of the people that go on this pilgrimage, like I said earlier, it's their first time traveling overseas. It's their first time using a passport. They have to get a passport first. And then they have to travel with it and enter a new country, a foreign culture, even though you all speak sort of the same language. So there's not a huge language barrier, which makes it easier for them. But they still have to navigate. They have to navigate your money, you know, changing their dollars into pounds, and that's a big, that really adds something important to their experience as pilgrims. And sometimes it's not easy. You run into difficulties, and you have to ask people for help. And that's what pilgrims should do. That's part of the experience.
May I say, on my first pilgrimage, Wesley pilgrimage, that having to schlep my suitcase from the train station to Salem College, just looking for the steeple, just trying to find my way. I was like, what have I gotten myself into by myself? What have I gotten myself into?
I think on that note, which is a note of adventure and a hopeful note.
I just want to add one more thing. I have to say
Sure.
this, that we strongly, and Melanie will remember this. We strongly encourage the people who go on this pilgrimage to pack light. Leave more stuff at home. Take only what you need.
And I think maybe I was actually going to finish off by asking you what your top tips for pilgrims were, but I think you've just told me. I don't know if you, if there is anybody who is attending tonight who is thinking about making their first pilgrimage, is there anything that you would like to say to them?
Wow, go with an open heart.
Oh, you're asking me? Yes. Yes, go with an open heart. That's good, Melanie. And be open to the people that you know, be ready and open to adventure and to people. Yeah.
Sure. Well, wonderful. Thank you so much. I think we could probably carry on for a little bit longer, but we are out of time this evening. On behalf of the New Room and the Learning Network, a huge thank you to Melanie and to Steve for speaking and reflecting this evening, and to Richard for reflecting in a very ad hoc way, off the cuff, but asking some really good questions because you didn't know actually what Melanie and Steve were going to say. So thank you so much for that. Now that the talk has been recorded, this talk is going to be placed as a digital download in the New Room's online shop. If you've attended tonight, you'll receive an email after the event, and if you want to download the talk and watch it and listen to it again, reflect on it further, there will be a discount for you to be able to download that. Or if you know anybody that hasn't been able to join us this evening and you would like to recommend that they download this talk and share it with a friend, then the talk will be available again in the online shop to download. As ever, we have a couple of final notices. Wes Talks is going to be taking a break in August, but please, if you're an attendee, please do look out for an email for us for more talks that we're going to be organising from the autumn onwards. And if you'd like to visit the New Room over the summer and the restrictions allow, then tickets to our museum are bookable online, and we have some new displays in the New Room Museum at the moment, including ones on Francis Asbury, primitive Methodism, and commemorations of anniversaries. I'd just like to end the talk now really by again saying a huge thank you to Melanie and to Steve and to Richard. Thank you for all that you've shared. As ever, I feel that I go away from these talks with much to think about and a full heart and a full head. So thank you so much, and thank you to Richard as well, and thank you to everyone who has attended. If you've attended before, you will know that we will bring up a poll question on your screen regarding your thoughts on this evening. So please do answer the question before you click leave. Contributors, if you could stay for a few moments so that we can wrap up our session. Thank you so much everyone for coming, and we look forward to seeing you again in the autumn.